Megamaniacs, this is Mr. MegaManFan, trying out something new on the channel, so you'll have to let me know if you like it or not. I'm taking the opportunity to look at obscure TurboGrafx/PC Engine games that you may have never seen or played before, and I'll call it the PC Engine Files. Shout out to Saramaro and the Saro crew for being enthusiastic TurboGrafx fans, which in part inspired this idea. Today's game is Toilet Kids, and this game is so obscure it doesn't even have an entry on Wikipedia, nor have I seen many copies of it. In fact, only one time at a retro gaming convention did I ever see a copy of this game, which wasn't for sale. It was only set up as a demo so people could play it and the guy could laugh at how ridiculous this game was. Now, if you go looking around on places like Price Charting, you will find a listing for it, but the last recorded copy they sold was an import in 2012, which sold for $70 loose, and they've also listed it as complete at $150 and new at $314, but I'm not even sure how you can derive those values, given that there's only one copy sold in the last 7 years. Who even knows what this would go for now? And to that end, it's only fair to tell you that I'm playing this via the Super SD System 3. Now, normally for a game like this, I would tell you, try it out in emulation first, and if you think it's good, buy a copy. But I'm going to just be straight up and say, I don't think you can find a copy to buy, and I don't think you'd want to pay whatever price it would sell for if you could. So some games may just be better left obscure. If there's a PC Engine museum that has every game ever released for it, a copy of it should belong there, but I don't think too many people need to have this game. If Saramaro does, more power to him. I'm impressed, but let me tell you one of the few entries that actually exists for this game and what they have to say about it, and it's pretty true to the material that you're watching right now. This is what Giant Bomb wrote. Toilet Kids is a vertical shoot 'em up in a world filled with scatological enemies and humor. A young boy is accidentally flushed down the toilet one night, appearing in a mysterious world, and must defeat the world's guardian before he can go home. The game has 4 stages total, each of which has a different theme, and the player is able to target both air enemies and ground enemies in a system similar to that introduced in Xevious. Now that last part, boy is it ever accurate, although to me it is much harder than Xevious, which astounds me since I'm playing the game on the purported easy mode, but because you can only target the enemies with the specific weapon that matches them, you can only destroy these golden poops using your bomb weapon, and you can only destroy those little insect-looking things with your shooter weapon. And if there was some way that you could just use one weapon on the other, but it was less effective, say hitting your ground-based enemies with the shooter, but it would require more shots than the bomb, then this might be somewhat fair. But because you can only hit them with only the weapon that's meant to destroy them, it's very, very difficult, very punishing, and unlike Xevious, there's just not much time to react to anything because you're constantly being pushed up towards the enemies, whereas Xevious seems to crawl along by comparison. They're both vertical scrollers, but Xevious is much more forgiving in its pace, and it's not quite a bullet hell because the ground-based enemies might fire one lone shot at you and then another shot at you, whereas these ground-based enemies have spread weapons and fire multiple shots at you. And there don't seem to be a lot of power-ups that you can pick up. I sporadically get one here or there, but you don't consistently get a whole lot of power-ups that help you power through Toilet Kids. It's not really surprising to me playing this game that it is an obscure game and that not many copies of it exist, because I can't imagine anybody thought, wow, a game about toilet humor as a shoot 'em up was really going to sell that well. I mean, I get that the Japanese video game market is full of wacky things like Choaniki, but at the same time, a bad version of Xevious as a toilet shoot 'em up does not strike me as a bestseller. I can't imagine that they blew through the initial shipments of it and people were clamoring for more. Media Rings Corporation wasn't like, wow, we just made a killing on this. We gotta print 10,000 more copies and sell out every last one of them. No, this is not Galaga. This is not Bonk. This is not Wise. This is Toilet Kids. It's obscure because it deserves to be. No offense to the creators of the game. It's hard to call it fun when I just don't think, unless you precisely memorize these short and intense stages and know exactly which weapon to use at exactly the right time, you're going to get any full enjoyment out of it. There's, even in a lot of bullet hell games, there's some forgiveness, like there's more than one way to solve the puzzle, so to speak. You could use a different pattern, or the enemy's shots will head in the direction that you're flying, so you can sweep to one side and lure the shots off and then move around it. There's just nothing like that here. It's, the enemies are in fixed places, the patterns are fixed, the scatological humor I get would be somewhat amusing, but it's also in 8/16-bit graphics, so it's not even that graphic, if you get my gist. It's, okay, here's what I can say that I think makes the most sense. The Binding of Isaac also has a lot of scatological humor and also has golden poo, but when you look at that stuff, you actually know what you're looking at, and half the time when you're playing Toilet Kids, you're like, okay, that's a poo, that's probably a toilet, and now I'm fighting spiders? What do they have to do with poo or toilets? It's like, can you even comprehend and put all of these things together? Tango agrees with me. He's over there chirping in the background. But I do want to say, you should try this game. I don't think I would say you should buy this game. Not for 70, 150, or 300 plus. I don't think it's worth that kind of investment. Just imagine the fact that if you bought this game new in an unopened box, you would spend more than the Super SD System 3 costs. And for what? A game with only 4 stages? That's not even that great? It's, the reason I have such memories of Toilet Kids is the sheer novelty value of being at a convention when somebody had a PC Engine set up and a copy of this game loaded into it, and they're like, it's a shoot 'em up about poo, you gotta see this. So of course, when you're at a video game convention and people are showing off wacky, obscure Japanese video games, you're going to take an interest in that sort of thing. Especially if you're a gaming enthusiast, a retro enthusiast, a collector enthusiast, anybody that is drawn towards the weird, obscure, and interesting novelties of video game history. Toilet Kids definitely fits all of those categories. But nobody succeeded wildly beyond their ambitions here. This is not a legendary game. This is not a game that made the developers a mint. Nobody built their career off of Toilet Kids. I can't imagine why you would need to own this. Only, I'm serious here, only if your goal is to own every PC Engine game ever made should you consider it. Megamaniacs, welcome back to the PC Engine Files, and I'm your host, Mr. MegaManFan. Now, I know I promised in the first episode this would be obscure PC Engine and TurboGrafx games, and you're probably saying, Space Invaders is not that obscure, but there is a little bit of weirdness to this one. Now, if you start with Wikipedia, which is, of course, always only as reliable as the people who edit it, who may or may not be experts. They list two PC Engine slash TurboGrafx Space Invaders games. One called Fukatsu no Hi, which they list as a Hue card in 1990, and one they list as Space Invaders the original game as a Super CD-ROM in 1995, neither of which were released in North America. Now that would make it obscure for the United States, but not for the rest of the world. But hold up, it's not quite that simple, because then I'd move on to the more definitive PCEngine.co.uk, and they too list two Space Invaders games. They list Space Invaders the original game for 1995, July 95 to be exact. They also list it as a Super CD-ROM, but what they are showing in the screenshots is not what I would call the original game. What I'm playing is what you would call the original game, because it looks like the Space Invaders that had the cellophane over the front where it was different bands of colors. So this would be like first or second generation Space Invaders from the late 1970s. And the screenshots they show on PC Engine COUK are not the original Space Invaders, but instead are backgrounds featuring anime girls, which was never in the original arcade game, and a head-to-head mode, which was also not part of the arcade game, and a cabinet select screen, which was also definitely not part of the original arcade game. So what they're calling the original game in 1995 is definitely not what I'm playing here. Also, I'm playing a Hue card, and this is a CD-ROM. So let's look at what they had to say about Fukatsu no Hi. This one says the updated version of the classic coin-op, and again, it has a different title screen from the game you see me playing here, and it has power-ups and shields and all sorts of different add-ons, including a cluster bomb weapon in one of the pictures that is definitely not accessible to me playing this version of Space Invaders. This to me seems to be a one-to-one port of the late 1970s or maybe early 80s Space Invaders arcade. Now, I will note that in the Space Invaders history, I talked about how they used the cellophane to create different color bands. They did later release a color monitor version that didn't have the cellophane bands, so this could be based on that version, the one that was actually displayed in colors instead of faking the color by having the light go through the transparent backgrounds. If you've used a Vectrix, it's sort of the same thing. You know, the overlays that you put on a Vectrix to get, quote, color graphics? Well, that was kind of the same idea with the original Space Invaders cabinets, but as they were more popular and as the franchise grew in strength and sales dominance, they did upgrade it to a full color version later on. I think that might have been called Space Invaders 2, technically. But definitely not what they're showing on what they're calling Fukatsu no Hi, which is not the original, just very pixelated, iconographic aliens. These are souped up aliens with 16-bit generation graphics and nothing to do with the original Space Invaders. So what is this that I'm actually playing? Because nothing seems to match up to it. The Wikipedia entries don't match it. The PC Engine COUK entries don't match it. It really seems to be a Hue card that doesn't exist. But this doesn't look like somebody's homebrew. This looks like an authentic Taito port of the original arcade game. So, I guess, Megamaniacs, I'm asking you to clarify this one for me. If you know any information, maybe somebody from the Saramaru crew or Saramaru himself might actually know. Does a one-to-one arcade port that's not a remake or an update of Space Invaders actually exist, or is this somebody's homebrew that they've just made so authentic that they actually put Taito's opening sequence and logo into and presented it in the original playfield with the original graphics and were that faithful to it just because. That doesn't really necessarily make a lot of sense to me, because if this was somebody's homebrew project and they gave all the credit to Taito and didn't even put one line in themselves, like, this game is not my own, but I coded it, so here you go, have it, enjoy it, I don't take any profit from it, but I released it because I'm a fan of Space Invaders. You know, you would think there'd be something in there like that. I'm thinking, and I can be proven wrong with this, there's no evidence to this, and that's why I'm asking for people to reach out and give me their comments, that there must have been like a budget title range for PC Engine and PC Duo and all those different related consoles, and it was never released here in North America, but in Japan at least, it was probably like a 500 yen or 1,000 yen game, like ports of arcade games and classic Japanese games, because you see that all the time. Like, PlayStation had their family-friendly titles that were always budget priced, kind of like a greatest hits or a classics series, if you're familiar with those. Those are on a lot of different platforms. Like, I know Scott DeWaz did a video bitching about how they changed the cover art on a lot of those, but budget titles do give people a way to play games and not have to spend a whole lot of money to get new games when you can price them under $20. So is that what happened here? Is this like a budget title, a HuCard budget release of some kind that nobody really knows about? If so, leave a comment below, and thanks for watching. Megamaniacs, welcome back to the PC Engine Files. I'm your host, Mr. MegaManFan, and in honor of the late Sid Mead, who passed away at the end of 2019, we are looking at Sid Mead's Terraforming today. This one is definitely obscure, but those who do know about it probably wish that they didn't, and not because it's not a good game, and not because Sid Mead wasn't an amazing designer of futuristic-looking objects and art styles and technology. What I associate most with him is the visuals from things like Blade Runner and Aliens, any of the crazy mechanical machines that you would see in those movies were drawn up or designed by him. And I suspect when they call this Sid Mead's Terraforming, it means that he did the art for it, but we'll get into that in just a minute, because I don't think of Sid Mead as a game designer as such, and I doubt he actually programmed it. Anyway, the reason I say those who do know about this obscure game probably wish they didn't is because, if you're trying to complete a PC Engine or a TurboGrafx collection, and this one is on your list, you're either somebody who makes a six-figure and up salary a year, or you won the lottery. Loose, this game goes for $600, complete $900, new almost $2,000, and I don't even think a copy of this has sold online in the last 2 years, 3 years. It's been a while since one's actually gone up for sale. This was at the tail end of the life cycle of the TurboGrafx in the United States. Around the time they were reformatted as TTI, they were mostly focusing on the Turbo Duo and releasing games in CD format because they were cheaper to produce and manufacture, but there was also limited demand for them because there weren't that many Turbo Duo owners, so not many of them were printed, and what's left of them now is in high demand from people who are trying to complete a set, as you can tell from the prices here. So rather than focus on that aspect of things, why don't we talk more about this very unique game, which honestly deserves to be more than just expensive as hell and obscure to all but hardcore collectors of the console. From Giant Bomb, Sid Meier's Terraforming is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up. Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious from my gameplay here. It was published in Japan by Naxxitsoft and in the US by Turbo Technologies Incorporated. As I said, TTI. The American concept artist Sid Meier, best known for futuristic science fiction designs and contributions to movies such as Blade Runner and Aliens, well, did I nail that one on the head or what? Was brought on to develop some of the game's artwork, including the player's ship. So yes, Sid Meier here is being credited for artwork and design, not for programming. Not saying that it's beyond the realm of possibility that a brilliant designer such as Sid Meier couldn't have taught himself programming and created a game from scratch, but no, he did not do that here. Terraforming uses a familiar power-up system that either replaces the current sub-weapon or upgrades the one the player is already using if it is of the same color. The player's main cannon upgrades independently, while the sub-weapon switches between powerful but limited lasers, electricity shots that have a small amount of homing power, and a spread shot that covers more of the screen. Yep, that's about the sum of it. I think my gameplay footage pretty much backs that up, and we are at the first boss fight here, and I just got killed. But I'm right back in the thick of things. I've got a small number of power-ups. Not plentiful, but enough to, I think, get the job done. This thing I'm fighting looks like some kind of flying biomechanical space turtle. It's actually got kind of a Godzilla Gojira series feel to it, like one of those fantastical beasts, larger than life, sort of looks like a familiar monster that we would know, but grown to enormous size. Although I don't actually know the scale of the ship involved here and the creature that we're fighting, so it's hard to say with relative accuracy. Let's see what somebody else has to say about terraforming. Let's try the PC Engine Software Bible, which I like to reference for a lot of these PC Engine Files videos. Oh, their description is much less robust than the one at Giant Bomb. Overview: a biological-themed shoot-'em-up featuring designs from the renowned Sid Meier, well, they got that part right, who worked on the movies Blade Runner, Aliens, and Tron. Yeah, I'm glad they mentioned Tron, and I should have at the beginning, because Tron was absolutely my favorite movie as a kid. Have any of you ever heard of they're not laser discs, but they're like, I guess the best way to describe them is they're like vinyl records that have video on them. This is an actual technology. You can watch Techmoan, Techmoan, and he's done videos about it. I believe they're called CEDs, and they actually came in a caddy, and you had to load the caddy into the player, and it would pull the disc in, and then you'd have to flip it over to the B side. You'd have to put the caddy back in, pull the disc out, flip it to the B side, and load the caddy back in again. It was really cumbersome, but as funny as it is, my library actually had one of these when I was growing up. Maybe they got a grant from the state to purchase new technology, and you could actually check it out. And they had a small library of movies that you could check out with it as well. You could take them home and watch. And when they got Tron, boy, did I go to town on that one. I checked out that thing. I brought it home. We hooked it up to the TV in the living room. I must have watched Tron like 10 times in a row. If it's not my all-time favorite movie, it's easily top 5. So the fact that Sid Meier had anything to do with the design or artwork of Tron speaks volumes to why I consider him such an amazing designer and why it's such a huge loss. And it was so obscured coming right at the end of 2019 with everybody's focus on so many other things that it was almost a blip on the radar at the time. And I hope as more time passes, more people will talk about just how influential Sid Mead really was when it comes to his vision of the future and how it shaped what we thought of as the future when I was growing up, and how it still shapes the designs that other people make in science fiction even to this day. It's a shame that his name is attached to a game that came out at the tail end of a failing console, which was never going to have a chance in the market against Sega and Nintendo and even to a lesser degree Atari. They were always going to run third or fourth in this market no matter who they were competing against. They just didn't have that kind of clout that they had in Japan, where the PC Engine was a huge hit. So, just out of curiosity, I decided to put it on this truth difficulty mode. I'm amused that that's like the hardest difficulty setting is truth. And the truth is, wow, it seems like they are really trying to fill up the enemy just level to the point where you almost can't handle the number of things on the screen at once, even with the powerful weapons that you have. Not that I'm noticing any kind of slowdown, because the TurboGrafx / Turbo Duo, PC Engine Duo, whatever you want to call it. Okay, it was, how do I put it? It was not as advanced as the 32-bit systems that came after Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, but it was more advanced in some ways than the 16-bit systems that it was contemporary to, in terms of its ability to handle multiple sprites on the screen at one time. Even though there's a lot of contentious debate about whether it's really an 8-bit or a 16-bit system, I think once you get into like super CD games like Rondo of Blood and Sid Mead's Terraforming, I don't think at that point you can really argue that it's not like operating at a 16-bit level, even if there's 8-bit architecture in the original PC Engine. And the funny thing is, they tried to release a fully next generation 16-bit PC Engine. They made a system called the Super Graphics, and then they only made 6 titles for it because the PC Engine was so well established in Japan that nobody wanted to pay lots of extra money to buy a Super Graphics with only 6 exclusive games for it, so it actually flopped. And the PC Engine continued to be huge there for many years to follow. It's a very interesting little quirky piece of trivia in the history of that console, but that is Sid Mead's Terraforming, a very unique game, a very overlooked game, and one that I hope you've enjoyed learning more about on my video today. Thanks for watching. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. This is the PC Engine Files, and today we have Circus Lido. Although that looks kind of like it says Lilo on the screen, but it is in fact Lido. And I'm going to quote from the Video Game Den this time, instead of pcengine.co.uk or Giant Bomb or anybody else, because I think what Video Game Den had to say hits the nail right on the head. So let me go ahead. Circus Lido is notorious among classic game enthusiasts, not because of its average at most qualities as a puzzle game, but for the unusual circumstances of its release. The game was quietly advertised in several Japanese video game magazines and officially released on April 16, 1991, but it was nowhere to be found in stores and went completely unnoticed. Because of this, Circus Lido was considered to be one of the rarest PC Engine HuCard games in the late 1990s, and the few rare copies that surfaced on the collector's market were snapped up for thousands of dollars, with some even arguing that the game was never commercially released. However, in 2000, this situation was about to change dramatically. For what seemed like obscure reasons, an increasing number of Circus Lido games began to appear, and the game's inflated value started to melt away. And the truth, finally revealed in 2001, is one of the most memorable and painful moments of PC Engine collecting history. Although Circus Lido was virtually impossible to find in the wild, several Japanese forums started to leak out that the game was available for its original retail price of 5,400 yen on Amazon Japan. To fully understand and explain this unexpected twist, we have to go back to 1991. In reality, Circus Lido did see a commercial release, but not in toy and game stores, but in libraries. It is really unclear as to why Unipost decided to only release this game in libraries, but it certainly explains why it went completely unnoticed and was nowhere to be found until 2000, when someone discovered that Amazon Japan still had a large stock available at the original retail price. Circus Lido shows how incredibly volatile the collectibles market can be and how speculation can cause the mighty to fall. And yet, I feel for those who paid thousands of dollars for the once rare and elusive Circus Lido. Interestingly, a special medal was made to commemorate the release of Circus Lido. 500 were made, and they were given away to the first players who cleared the 40 levels. It is, however, hard to tell how many were actually given away, considering how badly the game sold. Circus Lido comes with an outer cardboard box similar to the ones which came with Super Graphics games. Each copy also includes a numbered user's card, which gives additional information about the game. There you have it. And, if I may, Circus Lido, although it is absolutely a perfect subject for the PC Engine files, deserves its place in obscurity. Now, Toilet Kids, when I talked about that game earlier, I admit there's something charming about a game that is so over the top, bent on being scatological and exploiting that unique side of Japanese humor, the Domokun side of things. But this is just a very bad puzzle game that has elements of Bubble Bobble, but none of the fun of playing it. Like, you don't even get to kill the monsters yourself once you trap them. You have to feed them to these Venus flytrap looking things, and then you have to move these platforms to get from one level to the next, just to either get them or get them to drop down to where you can eat them. And give up is something that you'll end up doing a lot. You can hit the select button to just commit suicide because you'll get frustrated with the fact that you can't find a solution and you can't get the monsters to a point where you can eat them. There's no way for your Lido, or whatever your character is supposed to be, this lizard looking thing, to be able to move to platforms unless he's got something he can cling to. He can't jump. He can cling to things, but he can't jump on things. So he can't even jump over those little obstacles on each level. It's just so ridiculous, especially if you trap a monster and release it. It can bounce up to another level, but you can't. And these Venus flytrap things, why are we required to feed them? What is the purpose here? Are we clearing an infestation and they're just an unwilling participant? Are they an endangered species and we're helping them thrive? Are we trying to create more of them as a biological weapon so we have to feed them and make more of them grow? Honestly, the monsters look like they'd be better biological weapons than the flytraps do. And the flytraps will eat you if you get too close and don't feed them a monster in the little capsule you closed it in. So, honestly, plot sucks. Gameplay mechanics kinda suck. The music is very repetitive and grating after a while. Circus Lido is notorious for its former rarity, but it's not notorious for its great gameplay. Now, honestly, I don't know what it currently goes for. I know about the history. I don't know the value in today's market. But much like I said with Toilet Kids, if you're paying a lot of money for this, then you must be somebody who is in a PC Engine museum who collects every game, because I certainly wouldn't recommend spending exorbitant amounts of money on a frustrating and, quite frankly, boring PC Engine game. This one just doesn't hold up. But I'm Mr. Mega Man Fan, and as always, thank you for watching this video. See ya! Welcome back to the PC Engine Files, and I'm your host, Mr. Mega Man Fan. Once again, we have a game that was not ever published in the United States, exclusive to the PC Engine in Japan, but would have been very easy to play on a TurboGrafx in North America, and is of course easy to play if you have a region card converter. But what I meant by easy to play is not that it's easy to play in your system, but that it's an easy game to play because it's a vertical shooter. This would have been very easy to port. There's not even really any languages that need to be localized here because you're just shooting. That's it. Let me read you a little from Hardcore Gaming 101, since there's not even a Wikipedia entry. That's how obscure Psycho Chaser is. Ahem. Japanese game developer Sting is most famous for the unusual combat systems in their various RPGs, as well as for creating the gloomy cult adventure game Baroque. Their first game, though, was a little-known PC Engine shooter called Psycho Chaser. Made by only 5 people, it's an impressive debut that already shows off the strong atmosphere and unique power-up system Sting's later games would be known for. The game's programmer, Shinichi Abe, is also the main programmer for Baroque, and the other 5 members of Sting that made Psycho Chaser stuck together for a while. While Psycho Chaser was originally published by Naxet, most of Sting had previously worked for a variety of developers and publishers. The most notable would be programmer Toyofumi Kunihiro, who designed Xevious Fardrout Saga for Namco, as well as the excellent PC Engine port of Truxton. The premise of Psycho Chaser is pretty basic. You control an android, the titular Psycho Chaser, sent out by humanity to destroy an evil AI that's out of control. Along the way, you fight a nice variety of enemies, consisting of flying drones in the air and mutated life forms on the ground. Compared to other shooters, Psycho Chaser's protagonist feels very powerful, a slowly marching robot rather than the futuristic aircraft one normally plays. His default weapon is a rapid line of fireballs that quickly destroy almost anything in their path. The trick is that enemies will approach you from all sides, so you can't afford to let any survive for long or you'll quickly get cornered. So you have 3 other more specialized weapons you need to quickly switch to and from to destroy them efficiently. There is also plenty of debris you don't want to run into. While touching the scenery won't damage you, it's very easy to get literally trapped between a rock and a hard place if you're not careful. And I think you can see that from my gameplay footage as well. Particularly in this first stage, you've got several waves of enemies that sweep up at you from the bottom. So if you're using your straightforward shooter, you have to lure them all the way up and then sweep underneath them to knock them out. But if you switch to your, I believe, 3rd weapon, maybe it's the 4th weapon, but if you switch a couple of times by hitting the 2 button, you get a homing weapon that makes these enemies a lot easier to deal with. Psycho Chaser. You know, as shoot 'em ups go on the PC Engine / TurboGrafx, it's neither the best nor the worst. I mean, Hardcore Gaming 101 is not wrong that your titular robot feels quite powerful. Look at the way I just destroyed that boss with ease. But that's actually sort of my gripe with it, is that I like some difficulty in a shoot 'em up. I don't want it to be like obscenely difficult to the point where I rage quit, but I also want it to be difficult enough where it's like, oh damn, I almost had that right. If I had just hung on to my power ups a little longer, I wouldn't be underpowered at the restart and I wouldn't be screwed now. So I'm going to go back and do that pattern again. And this time I'm going to remember where that enemy was. And this time I'm going to avoid that bullet fire. I'm going to do everything better than I did the last time. That's what I like about a shooter, is when it rewards you for being adaptive and learning. And as you get better, it gets more challenging. And as it gets more challenging, you get better. It's a feedback loop where you improve as you go through the game, and the challenges get more rewarding because you're getting better as you go. Whereas if you just get ridiculously overpowered to the point where you've got a full spread of missiles and a weapon that can blow through any boss, and you just march relentlessly as this titular psycho chaser does, then where's the challenge? I mean, that's like an auto run level in Mario Maker. It's clever, it's fun to watch, but you're not really doing anything. A shooter should make you work for it. And I'm not saying there's no challenge to Psycho Chaser, or I wouldn't have just died and had to restart there, but this feels like one where if you use the homing missile weapon in particular, it can get ridiculously easy, because you can almost, aside from the ground obstacles, of course, you can almost stand in one place and fire and hit everything. And you don't even have to mash the button repeatedly. You can actually just hold the button and it does the firing for you. So I'm kind of left in a bit of a quagmire here, because I don't hate Psycho Chaser. The graphics look pretty good. The sound effects are pretty good. The gameplay is, want to guess? Pretty good. There's nothing terrible about it. And by the same token, I can also say, even though this would have been an easy game to port to TurboGrafx, there's just not a whole lot that says this would have been a bestseller. This would have made a ton of money for everybody involved. Sting, Naxxitsoft, NEC, anybody that was releasing this game in North America would have made I guess they would have made a small return on their investment, but the TurboGrafx was already third or fourth place in the market, so to say there was a huge amount of profit to be made is ridiculous to begin with. And then, since this is just an average shooter at best, I don't know that it really would have caught on with the public and gone viral to the point that it had been like a bestseller with 1 million copies and common to get on eBay now for a few bucks. You know, it's just, it never would have been one of those games. It would have had a niche following, it would have made a small amount of money, and for everybody involved, it was probably just like, eh. It's not like there's a hit anime series to tie this to, either one that's been dubbed into English for the US or one that's a cult classic in Japan. There's just nothing marketing-wise that would make this a hit. And it also just isn't that rare of a title either, even in Japan. You can get loose copies for 20 bucks, complete copies for 25. In fact, I just looked right now, and there's a US seller with a copy for 25 bucks, which might sound like it's a little bit of money, but compared to a lot of PC Engine and TurboGrafx games, 25 bucks is actually kind of on the low end, because these games get stupidly expensive really fast. So Psycho Chaser is not that rare, not that in demand, and not that overwhelmingly like, oh my god, you have to play this. To me, it's just the very definition of the middle ground as far as this console and these games go on the PC Engine files. It's good enough. Like, if you have the Super SD System 3 and you want to try this game out, download it, try it. I don't know if you really want to spend the money to buy it. I just don't think it's necessarily worth going the extra mile to own a physical version of it unless you're super dedicated. But it does stand out as a game that never got released here, so it's not well known and worthy of discussing on the PC Engine Files for that reason alone. But I wouldn't go out of your way. It's just there. The TurboGrafx, the PC Engine, it has a lot of good shooters on it. In fact, a lot that are way better than this particular game. So hunt down those games instead. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thank you for watching. Hey Megamaniacs, this is Mr. MegaManFan and welcome back to the PC Engine Files, where I'm doing something a little different this week. I've got to admit, as much as I like the Super SD System 3, capturing footage on a tripod of my TV was not producing the kind of quality that I really preferred. I could always go back to it later if it's demanded, but I think for now I'm going to switch to capturing PC Engine footage on my computer and syncing up the audio and video for the best possible quality and framing it with a nice Mega Man border on either side for appearances, which may be helpful considering I absolutely stink at this game, at least at the beginning. This game is called Gokurukuchuka Taisen, or perhaps just call it Cloudmaster, because it's known as Cloudmaster on other platforms, including Sega Master System, but I don't recommend that version, nor the remake, which was curiously enough called The Monkey King, and came out on Nintendo Wii in the mid to late 2000s. I don't recommend that version either. The only version of Cloudmaster that you really should play is the one for PC Engine, which never got released here in the United States on TurboGrafx 16, but with a Super SD System 3 or a PC Engine card converter, you can of course play it. Let me tell you a little bit about the game from the Wikipedia entry for said game. Ahem. Chuka Taisen is a horizontal scrolling shooter released for arcades by Taito in 1988. The Famicom version is titled Chuka Taisen and was not available in the United States for the Nintendo Entertainment System. The player controls Mike Chen, floating on a cloud, maneuvering around the screen, and shooting balls of energy at flying enemies. Power-ups can be collected for stronger, faster firepower. Some parts of the game have doors that give the player opportunities to buy special bomb types with collectible credits. Each stage has its own mini-boss and big boss. Throughout the stages, the player restarts at certain checkpoints after losing a life. Here you can see an example of a mid-stage boss as opposed to a big boss, and when this boss is defeated, the aforementioned special door opens up. What this reminds me of is Fantasy Zone on the Sega Master System, where you collect the coins by destroying the enemies on the screen, and then every now and then you get the opportunity to enter a shop and buy limited time power-ups for your character, Opa Opa. And I will say these are also limited as well, because you can see I have a fireball shield, but it barely lasts and then I'm dead again, so maybe that wasn't the ideal power-up to use. Chuka Taisen, Cloudmaster, whatever you choose to call it, is a pretty challenging game. But this is the kind of challenge I was talking about in Psycho Chaser, where it's a rewarding challenge because if you get better, you can get further. And if you get further, you want to get better. It's a self-feeding cycle that rewards you for improvement. So you have to manage a lot of different obstacles on the screen at one time. This flying food can shoot you, so you have to be careful to move out of the way of its bullet spray. I don't know how food sprays bullets, but it does, so you have to avoid that. Then there are ground-based enemies that can fire upward at you. Then there are obstacles you can get trapped behind on the ground if you're strafing too low on the ground and don't keep mindful of where you are positioned. So you can get literally stuck between a rock and a hard place. So there are many ways to die. many enemy patterns to learn and memorize, many different things that you need to accomplish to get good at Cloudmaster. But because the game rewards you for getting better and gives you a very pleasant appearance and aesthetic and sound, it tends to, how do I say, encourage repeat play, because I think this one is borderline to being a cute 'em up, which also fits in with the Fantasy Zone comparison I made a moment ago. There's just something charming about your protagonist flying around on a cloud. It's got a very Dragon Ball quality to it. It's charming. Even the fact that food is flying at you is charming. It makes no sense whatsoever to mix dragons and flying food and winged angels and all these different things together in a shoot 'em up. But John Tron described this best in one of his videos. He was like, the Japanese have some crazy shit. They lived alone on an island for thousands of years, and I saw a movie once where Tom Hanks became best friends with a ball. A ball! And he only was on an island for a year or two. So, this strikes me as an example of that. Like, this is where the creative inventiveness of Japanese culture is put to full display, where they unapologetically mix all these disparate elements together. You've got some anime, some shoot 'em up, some side-scrolling action, some power-up systems, and you put it all in a blender and mix it up and pour it out, and what do you get? You get Cloudmaster. I don't know if this was a big hit in the arcades for Taito, but I feel like this could have been a cult classic if it had ever been properly distributed in the United States. As I noted with Psycho Chaser, there's certainly some limitations to that because there's no anime tie-in, there's no marketing push that would have gone along with this. But because of the fact that you don't really need a working knowledge of Japanese to play this game, the localization would have been a fairly easy task. And the style of the gameplay and the cuteness of the game in the whole, the music, the sound, the graphics, everything, it would have found an audience. Would it have found a huge audience? Would it have made tremendous profits that would have just made everybody involved rich beyond avarice? No, probably not, but I think this one would have been a cult classic if it had come out here. I think years later people would fondly remember and they'd be like, oh hey, that game Cloudmaster? That was pretty kick-ass. They should do a remake of that. Which ironically they did on Nintendo Wii, and quite frankly that version of it is just not good because it doesn't have the charming 8 to 16-bit style this version does. It tries to show off some graphical processing power by doing a tilting thing with the display, which is totally unnecessary, and changing the character of Mike Chen into a monkey and renaming it Monkey King, I feel like that's actually a disservice to the source material. Even though the source material is totally wacky, at least it's original in its wackiness. This whole China meets Japan type aesthetic they've got going on here. And they should have stuck with that instead of trying to, I don't know if you'd say westernize it or localize it, but in the process of updating it, they definitely changed what it's all about. Now, here I made a critical mistake with the boss. I forgot that by hitting the second button on the controller, you can actually flip around and face the other direction. So I was trying to only shoot it facing one direction. And eventually, I picked up on my mistake and remembered that you can flip to face the other direction regardless of where you are. It doesn't have to be a stage boss or a mid-stage boss. You can circle around and fire to the left instead of always having to fire to the right. You are not limited in that particular way. So here I finally get my shit together, start firing the correct direction, but it's already too late because I've taken too much damage and I'm out of lives, but this is a fun game. I do recommend you play it. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to the PC Engine Files. This is your host, Mr. MegaManFan, and this is what I consider to be the most difficult challenge I've had yet on any episode. It's called Quiz Maraguto The World 2 Time Machine the Onagai, with the exclamation point at the end, hence my emphasis. Now, this game is being featured on my actual Turbo Duo instead of through emulation because I just got this disc yesterday and I wanted to play it on real hardware, but that may not have been the greatest choice because this disc is a little beat up and it tends to have problems loading at times. Now, to start out with, I selected what I thought would be a puzzle mode. I was hopeful based on the look of that icon, thought maybe I could bluster my way through the game. But let me read you a little bit about what Moby Games has to say as you watch me try in vain to play this, and note that I edited out a lot of the times that it just freezed up or refused to load. Time Machine no Onagai differs from its predecessor by having its own unique gameplay modes rather than strictly following a TV game show format. The Time Machine mode involves traveling to different time periods and answering trivia questions in order to trigger famous events. Another mode is called Megatan Quest. However, it is not a Megami Tensei related quiz, but an imitation of a first-person dungeon crawler with random enemies who ask the player a certain number of questions on various themes. I didn't even try that mode. I tried this puzzle mode and got nowhere fast. I didn't even know what direction I was supposed to move these blocks in the puzzle in, and you could only move the puzzle blocks 3 at a time when you got a question correct. And it would just freeze up and not load a new question, so I finally gave up on that and decided, let's just go back and try the regular trivia mode. And boy, was I surprised when I saw the host of this game show looking like some kind of mutated C-3PO with a human head grafted onto an android body. Although I assume this is supposed to be the time traveling theme, that's supposed to be like the suit a time traveler would wear. Also, his lips don't sync up very well with the audio. I'm not sure if that's a quality of the disc or just a quality of the actual design of the game itself. But it's not matched up too well. It's not in sync. I'm just not impressed by it. I get there are limitations to a CD as opposed to a DVD or a Blu-ray, but it feels like they only went as far as they had to and no further in trying to work within the limitations of the CD-ROM format. And that limitation was, we're going to not use FMV, we're going to digitally animate a talking head, and we're going to just barely sync it up with some audio that we recorded because the audio takes up less space by itself than a full motion video. They're trying very hard to make this presentation funky with all these visual effects that they do, including that screen wipe that we saw and the opening scrolling, rolling vertical screen that made the opening of it look like my Turbo Duo was going haywire. And look at these dinosaur animations as a example of what I'm talking about. Since when did dinosaurs bounce around like bunny rabbits? It's like, okay, we'll put a sprite of a dinosaur on the screen and we'll do something to make it look like it's moving. And we'll put the least amount of effort we have to into that, and that's it. Then you get this scrambled picture, which is either the game glitching out or my CD being scratched. I have no idea. But you have to answer at least 4 questions correctly to move on to the next round. And when it does, we get a really long loading time. And then we get another shot of the dinosaurs, only now clearly the extinction event has occurred, the planet's climate has changed, and all the dinosaurs are going to freeze to death. And suddenly, they just fall into a heap and snow falls on them. And that's as far as I could get in this particular game, Quiz Maragato the World 2 Time Machine no Onagai, because it just froze. It does nothing. I was starting to worry that maybe my Turbo Duo was at fault and not the game itself, so I pulled out Wise Book 1 and 2, loaded it up in the Turbo Duo, and it's working exactly as it should. Everything's loading up, graphics look fine, audio is fine, the videos are fine. It's clearly my disc, which it even said in the description might have some light scratches, so I left positive feedback for Japan for you because I got exactly what I paid for, and I don't have any complaints about their service ever, but my disc is barely readable, and it's not even really playable, even if it was readable, so it was $1. It didn't kill me, but obviously not anything that I can recommend to anybody outside of Japan or who doesn't have intimate knowledge of Japanese, because even if my disc was perfect in condition and worked perfectly, I'd still only get so far on it. And I just don't think the premise itself is really that strong. Traveling through time to answer trivia questions doesn't seem like it would make for great, compelling gameplay. I just can't recommend it. It's, for a hardcore PC Engine collector, something you might want. Even then, I'm not sure, because the fact that I got it for $1 suggests to me it's just not in that much demand. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thank you, as always, for watching. Welcome back to the PC Engine Files. I'm your host, Mr. MegaManFan, and this curious game is called Genpi Tomoden, or the Genji and Heiki Tale of the Demon's Demise, or the Genpi Tale of the Demon Slayer. Now, I first discovered this game watching Saramaro's PC Engine Fridays, hadn't previously played it before that time, and let me tell you, it's pretty brutally hard. You'll probably gather that from watching my footage for PC Engine Files, but let me tell you a little about the history of this game. It was developed for the arcade in October of 1986, released in Japan at that time, developed by Namco and Denpa, and later published by Namco and Mikumsoft. It had subsequent releases on the Sharp X68000 in April of 1988, the Famicom in Japan October 21st of 1988, and this version, which is on the PC Engine / TurboGrafx, March 16th, 1990. It's had many re-releases since then, including on the Wii Virtual Console only in Japan on March 31st, 2009. It also made an appearance on Namco Museum Volume 4 for PlayStation, but we'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to tell you about the gameplay, which you're watching right now, including this guy with the riverboat in the sky dropping 16-ton weights on my head. Not very nice of him to do that. The player makes his way along the Japanese countryside. Well, that's a dark, ominous, gothic-looking Japanese countryside if I say so, but I'll take their word for it. He makes his way along the Japanese countryside, fighting enemies as they appear. And boy, do they appear frequently. You are getting mobbed in this game. You will die a lot. The game offers 3 types of action: small mode, big mode, and plain mode. You're going to see quite a lot of the small mode here. Big mode comes next, and then plain mode is the third stage that I managed to get through before the playthrough was done. Most stages have tori, which are used to transport the player to a different stage. Those are the gates that you walk into when you reach the end of a stage. On stages featured in side mode and plain mode, there are multiple tori, which will lead to different routes on the map. In big mode, however, there is only one tori at the end of the stage. The leading character is a historical Japanese samurai, Taira no Kagikyo, also known as Akusubichio Kagikyo. And I am so sorry, I know I butchered that. He fell in the Battle of Dan no Nura at the end of the Genpi War. In Genpi Tomoden, he was resurrected and fights Minamoto no Yoshitsune and Saito Musashibo Benkei over the imperial regalia of Japan, as well as to defeat his enemy Minamoto no Yoritomo. The game also features the Sanzu River, a place believed in Japanese Buddhism to separate current life and afterlife, resembling the concept of the underworld or hell. This river is often compared to the river Styx in Greek mythology. Therefore, some mythological characters like Emma O, god of the underworld, and the sun goddess Amaterasu, is that how you say it? Amaterasu, appear in the game. Again, I really apologize if I butchered the Japanese on that. So, this game was included on Namco Museum 4, and you would think a very culturally Japanese game like this would not have been included on the US version, but it was. It was retitled the Genji and Heike clans and localized to that degree with the appropriate amount of English necessary to understand what's going on, and it was included on Namco Museum Volume 4. Unfortunately, Volumes 2 and Volume 4 of the Namco Museum collection are two of the hardest ones to get, along with Volume 5. Volume 1 and 3 both got a green greatest hits re-release, with that green logo on the side, on the binding, on whatever you want to call it, the fold in, on the Jewel CD, the place where you read the title if you stack them up in a CD case. And I hear my cat crying at me. I don't know where he is right now, but he may interrupt this voiceover. Anyway, if you're looking to buy this on Namco Museum Volume 4, it's probably going to set you back a little bit. Let me see what it's currently going for. Namco Museum Volume 4. Haven't looked at this in a long time since I got it a long time ago. Could be worse. Goes for $29 loose and $37 complete. So if you want to play the PlayStation version, you're going to pay for it, but I think it's actually even more expensive for PC Engine. And like I said, until I saw Saramaru play it, I didn't even know there was a PC Engine version. So I don't think Price Charting has this on their list of TurboGrafx/PC Engine games. So I'm gonna just take a stab at eBay and see what it tends to go for. Genpei Tomoden. Doing this live as I do the voiceover, and you're watching the big mode right now. The big mode is harder than you would think because you're swinging the sword in a full motion, so you actually have to hit some of the low enemies by swinging your sword before they get to you and letting the, how would you say, recoil, withdrawal, the arc of the sword returning. You have to hit them with the sweep back instead of sweeping at them. Then you got this giant freaking skeleton here who, even when he's a pile of bones, still hurts you. You have to wait until the bones disappear completely, so that stymied me in big mode. At least when you die on a stage, it's generous enough to let you actually return to the stage. Genpei Tomoden is not the most expensive PC Engine game, depending on which version of it you want. You can get it loose for $10. You can get it complete for $25. You can get the Famicom version for anywhere from $7 loose to, wow, $1 loose. So it's obviously pretty common for Famicom, a little less common for PC Engine, and then the PlayStation Namco Museum Volume 4 version is probably the most expensive unless you're looking for a completely gem copy of it. Now, there was a sequel to this game in both territories. It's called Genpei Tomoden Kan no Ni, and this one is in fact a PC Engine game that got localized in North America called Samurai Ghost. Let me see what that's going for. I don't think I have a copy of Samurai Ghost. There are a lot of PC Engine games that I can't afford physical copies of, and that might be one. That might be a future episode of PC Engine Files. You're watching Planes Mode right now as I look this up. Ooh, yeah, Samurai Ghost goes for $72 loose and $154 complete. So that's starting to get into that territory where the Super SD System 3 becomes a bargain, because just 2 or 3 games like that is the entire cost of the Super SD System 3. So, not saying I encourage you to bootleg games, but you could demo them, you could sample them with a Super SD System 3, and then of course decide if you really want to spend anywhere from $72 to $150 on a game like Samurai Ghost. But before you do that, definitely start with Genpi Tomoden, because despite the ridiculous difficulty and the mob-like mentality of these enemies, it's actually a lot of fun to play. You're going to die a lot, you're going to have to restart a lot, but the restarts are fairly generous given that you get to go back to where you were, the stage you were on. The stages themselves are not overly long, so if you bum rush your way through it, sometimes you can just get lucky and finish a stage. And I like the sound and design. It's a little bit weird because your character's bright red hair and purple outfit just are garish to look at, but I'd say this is one of those cases where the odd appearance of things is actually sort of the charm of it all. It's actually more fun because of that. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, this is the PC Engine Files, and as always, thank you for watching. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, this is the PC Engine Files, and you're looking at Koryun, Child of Dragon. Although every time I say the title Koryun, I hear the voice of Yahtzee Croshaw from The Escapist in my head saying core gameplay. More like, core blimey, what a piece of shit. So, I'm not doing a British accent for that. I don't want to do an insult to him, but you get the idea. Koryun is a shoot-'em-up made by Naxxit Soft, which is a publisher of a lot of shoot-'em-ups for the PC Engine / TurboGrafx 16. And Naxxit, by the way, is the anagram of Taxon, which is the parent company. Naxxit Soft was their publishing and developing wing for console gaming, and most of their console games seem to be on PC Engine. And this one is one of the more infamously expensive ones. It is not Magical Chase expensive, but it definitely is going to put a hurtin' on your wallet if you're looking for it, because right now it's going from anywhere between $300 and $500 on eBay, which is why I am unapologetically encouraging you to play this one in emulation or through your Super SD System 3 as opposed to buying a physical copy, because the prices are ludicrous, and even worse, at this price, counterfeiting becomes a serious concern, because people will go out of their way to make a fake, authentic looking reproduction of something that costs them like anywhere from $5 to $15 in materials if they can get that much of a return on the sale. So I'm not saying any of the ones currently available on eBay as I'm recording this are fakes. I think I could look at one of them and wonder, since it doesn't have a label on it, and that's an automatic red flag in my book. But they could all be genuine, and then again, they could all be fake. I mean, again, when you're talking about hundreds of dollars, it's a real concern. But why are you saying is this game so expensive and so sought after? Well, Giant Bomb has a few answers as regards that subject. They say it was developed by the same people who worked on Airzonk, and it can be considered a, quote, spiritual successor, unquote, to that game, although they actually rate it as a better game. I think they might have a point there. I feel like this is a very easily accessible, fun, borderline cute 'em up, if not outright cute 'em up, shoot 'em up game because this little dragon is just absolutely adorable, and the power-ups that he collects do very cute things like giving him fire breath or electricity, and the fruits that he collects are, I don't know, it just gives it kind of like a Fruit Ninja shoot 'em up feel. It's very whimsical. And as they note, it's a little bit on the easy side because if you're very judicious about collecting all of the fruits, you rack up extra lives quite quickly because you get big bonuses. They suspect that this game was made with a younger audience in mind, but I wouldn't say it's without challenge because, boy, that first gameplay that you saw while I was introducing it and talking about what it sells for, you could see I was getting completely lost in the number of things that are on the screen at any one time. Not that the PC Engine / TurboGrafx can't handle that many objects on the screen, it can, and that's why shoot 'em ups are so great on this particular system. It's just a little overwhelming to the eyes, especially with the parallax scrolling background going on at the exact same time. It really can throw you for a loop trying to keep track of all the different things going on and which ones are things you should collect and which ones are things you should avoid. And it takes several playthroughs. As you can see, I'm doing better on my second run, but it's still very taxing, no pun intended on taxing, just to get the hang of it and get used to the number of things going on at any one time. And the power-ups are also something that you have to learn to adjust to as you play, because the power-ups that the storks drop are color-coded, and which one you get is which one you get the power for. If you get a red one, you get fire. If you get a blue one, you get a water attack that functions like a laser. If you get the yellow one, which I actually like the best but seem to have a hard time coming up with, you get a spread attack, and it shoots little lightning bolts. And whenever you get hit, you lose whatever weapon you collected immediately. Doesn't kill you immediately, but you get depowered, so it can be kind of frustrating with that many things on the screen, and then you get a great power-up, and then you immediately lose it because there's so much going on that you get hit without even intending to. And one of the power-ups also seems to make your tiny dragon even tinier. You go into a tiny mode where you're smaller than everything on the screen, like you see it right there. That might actually make it easier to dodge some of the enemies, but I actually find it harder because it's harder to keep track of Koryun when he's so much smaller that I feel like I'm going to fly into things even though I could probably dodge things a little more easily. It's a 50-50 proposition. Maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. It's so hard to say, but this is an incredibly fun shoot 'em up to play, which is why it's become such a legendary PC Engine title. It's at that unique nexus point of not having been released here, which makes it more interesting to people, and being totally adorable, which makes it more interesting to people, and being a really good shoot 'em up with a really good development team behind it, with very big colorful graphics and very well done layouts and designs in the enemies and the bosses. I mean, just look at these Pegasus ponies that are shooting lasers. If you can't laugh at that and have a good time doing this kind of thing on a PC Engine or a TurboGrafx or through an emulator or through a Super SD, I don't know what to tell you, because this is just stupid fun, man. It's right up there with some of the best games that are on this system, which unfortunately just increases the overall cost. So by all means, use an EverDrive or something, because I can't justify paying $300 to $500 for one game. If you're a super hardcore, dare I say even an otaku, even though that word is not always flattering, but maybe in this case it would really fit, because you have to be somebody that just absolutely is obsessed with Japan, just has to have everything in one set that comes from Japan. And if you're that kind of person with anime or PC Engine games or whatever, this would be one that you'd be like, I'm a completist, I just gotta have Koryun. It's that kind of game. But otherwise, for slightly more rational people, I would suggest emulation, EverDrive, SD card, whatever you can do because it is stupid expensive. It's also stupid fun though, so maybe if you hit the lottery or have an inheritance and you just really want a copy that bad, what can I tell you? I can't say you won't get some play value out of it. Maybe, just maybe, you'd get lucky and find one at an import shop that somebody didn't price correctly. And if you saw it for like 25 bucks instead of 300 bucks, at that point, how could you not get Koryun? Except, of course, if you thought it was counterfeit, because at 25 bucks, it just might be. It could be the opposite extreme of if it's either too cheap or too expensive, it might be bootleg. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to the PC Engine Files. I'm your host, Mr. MegaManFan, and this is Ryukyu, a game from Face in 1990 produced by ASCII Corporation, and there's not a lot of information about this game out there on the internet. Very few sites have any kind of write-up for it, and the ones that do have only a short blurb and not much information, so hopefully I'm putting out a little more than was previously known about this game because I actually sat down, took the time to play it. Now, the only thing you're not going to get here is the music from the game because, quite frankly, it's very boring. It's like a slowed down version of the shop music from Fantasy Zone. Do 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 do. I think you get the idea. It's just not even necessary for the gameplay. And the sound effects, well, there's only one sound effect. It's the sound of a card dropping into a row. So there's not much to hear there either. So I think by dubbing in some instrumental music, I'm doing you all a favor to make this more interesting. And at first, you might be saying, well, that's why there isn't a write-up about Ryukyu anywhere. What's so interesting about dropping playing cards into rows and columns? At first, I would have agreed with you. I didn't even really understand what I was doing. I just fumbled around, but eventually it dawned on me that what you're doing in this game is making poker hands, and each row or column that you fill is a complete hand. So what you're doing is playing both rows across, rows up and down, and even diagonal rows. You can make a poker hand if they go from one corner to the other, and you've got like three of a kind, or a straight flush, or a full house, or two pair, or whatever. And it awards you points based on the difficulty of the hand you created. The better the hand, the more points you get. And it is level based that you have to exceed a certain amount of points with all the possible hands you can make before you fill up the entire grid. And if you do that, then you advance to the next level. And if you don't, it says game over and you've got to try again. Now, that leads to very interesting strategies because the further you get to the top, the less options you have to play cards. So it forces you to think carefully about your opening plays, because once you drop down from the top and you've only got a few spots left, you need to make poker hands like the diagonal one that I just made there, or the pair that I just got there. You've got to use that last row to rack up the maximum amount of points you can right before you run out of spaces, so you hit that clear goal. It doesn't seem like this should be as addictive as it is, but trust me when I say this, hopefully you do trust me, that you get a real buzz when you get a clear like that. It's a very satisfying feeling when you're like, oh shit, I actually made enough matches to beat the level, I can move on. And apparently, your reward for moving on is that it reveals tiles to show you something behind the screen. You can sort of see it through the grid. It appears to be a woman's face, and I'm not sure. I hate to speculate on this kind of thing, but some of these games for PC Engine, some of these puzzle games, some of these tile games, some of these strategy games were soft core. And because of that, I'm going to limit my gameplay of Ryukyu to a certain point because I don't actually want to reveal too much of this image and potentially find out it is what I think it might be and get flagged. So if you want to do a longer gameplay session of Ryukyu, I would suggest doing that on your own, and you get to hear the stock generic music and stock generic sound effects. But in saying that, I feel like I might be knocking Ryukyu a little too much. I don't know that it's necessarily bad that a puzzle game has generic music and generic sound effects, because that's not the draw, pun intended, for a card game. That's not the draw here. The draw is solving the puzzle, creating the best hands, getting the most points, clearing the levels. You could put anything in the background, which is literally what I've done here. It doesn't matter what the background music is or what the sound effects are, because you're going to be so mentally tuned into the challenge that it all just goes away. It gives you this, what athletes talk about as the tunnel vision effect, where you don't hear the crowd, you don't see anybody around the field, you're only seeing what you're doing at that moment. And this game creates that sense of tunnel vision that you get locked in and you're thinking about all the matches you're making, because again, the grid, look right there, you just saw multiple matches that I made at the same time, and that is such a great feeling when you get that and you make that right move and you're like, oh sweet, I made 3 combos in one play. It's very addictive, and it boggles my mind that, considering we as gamers love puzzle games, we love strategy games, we love RTS and turn-based games and role-playing games and games where you have to make a lot of strategic decisions, it boggles me that nobody has ever really done a profile on Ryukyu or talked about it. But that info, just like I said, it doesn't exist outside of this video. Like, the PC Engine Bible has a 1-sentence description that's something like a strategy game where you play poker cards to make hands. That's all. And if you search for Ryukyu, if you do a Google search or DuckDuckGo or anything else, you get a lot of places with a name RYUKYU. You know, it's like a city name, a river name, a mountain name, whatever. But you don't get this game. It's not until you type in Ryukyu PC Engine that you actually get any search results on it. So I think that actually makes it perfect for the PC Engine files, in that it really is an obscure game. I'm pretty sure I've never seen anybody even play this before. Not even my friend Sarumaru, hashtag Saru Crew. So he plays PC Engine games almost every Friday night. And to my knowledge, I've never seen Ryukyu pop up on one of his feeds. I'll be honest, since so many PC Engine games that I've never played before are shoot-em-ups, I booted this one up without even having looked it up beforehand for my gameplay here on the PC Engine files, and I thought it would be another shoot-em-up. And I wouldn't say I'm disappointed, because I actually really enjoy this game a lot now that I've played it, but I was surprised. I mean, it really feels like 9 times out of 10, if you pick a game at random from PC Engine, it's a shooter. And that is part of the reason TurboGrafx and PC Engine has such a cult following, is that shooter games just seem to run better on PC Engine compared to other consoles from the era. Like, try playing the exact same game on NES and PC Engine if there's like a port that goes on both consoles, and the NES is probably going to have a lot more flickering sprites and maybe even some significant slowdown, whereas the PC Engine breezes through that shit. It has either a faster processor or better mapping or better sprite rendering or what, I don't know. What it could even just be the number of megahertz in the CPU. It's faster, so it can display everything. It has enough time to do all the operations and not get bogged down to the point where something's got to give. So it's worth it just to play shooters on the PC Engine, even if that's all you ever do. But it's refreshing to know that that's not all you ever do. There are platforming games, there are puzzle games, there are more options out there than you would think. And Ryukyu is a great example of that. Look at that clear I just got. I needed 6350. I got to 6400. That is so satisfying when that happens. So I encourage you to give this one a try, especially if you like puzzle games, because I don't think there are enough of them that really get this kind of love like I'm giving this one right now. I'll even go that far. Yes, I do love it. I would play this one again, not just for a video, but just to sit down and unwind for a while, because puzzle games are also really good for that aspect. By giving you that tunnel vision and letting your mind focus on what you're doing, you're also taking away other things outside of your tunnel vision, like anxiety, stress, problems in your life. You know, sometimes you just need that mental time off where you can just sit down, do something for a while and not think about the other things, and then come back and deal with those things later. Not that you're avoiding your problems, but that you're giving yourself a chance to rest and recover before you go back to tackling them again. You know, that's important for an athlete. You know, they do a lot of hard physical lifting or running or training, and then they have to have a recovery period. You know, you take a breath, you drink some Gatorade, you wipe off the sweat with a towel, whatever you do, and then you come back to it later. And I think rest and recovery is just as important mentally as it is physically. I think there are benefits to be drawn from each. Take a break once in a while. Give yourself a chance to breathe, a chance to relax and not be stressed out, and then come back to whatever stressful thing you're dealing with, and you'll be able to handle it that much better. That's just my personal philosophy on the whole thing, but your mileage may vary. Some people really thrive under stress, and to that I say more power to them. If you're the kind of person who actually functions better in stressful situations, then feel free to ignore my advice. But my advice on this is try Ryukyu. It's a lot of fun. Thanks for watching.